I take issue with the concept that, number one, Iran's become weakened. They've now got a military alliance with Russia that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Fair.
They do have a stronger military relationship with China that didn't exist years ago. They're now members of BRICS, which that was not the case 2 years ago. So they now have economic alternatives that go outside and are not governed by the sanctions. They've reestablished relationships with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And so instead of being, quote, weakened, and militarily, I tell you what's happening. We're going to probably hear Khatami, I believe, is supposed to speak to the Iranian nation tomorrow. I think Iran's going to go ahead and build a nuke. I think they'll have a nuke ready to go within a month or two, because they've now recognized this effort to try to make nice with the West, this effort to try to talk to the West, to try to negotiate, because you correctly, you nailed it, Danny. They don't pose a threat to the United States. They've not carried out a single terrorist attack against U.S. civilians, in the last 30 years. And when you go to the State Department record of, they're the source of the country reports on terrorism, the top 10 terrorist groups, none of them have any relationship whatsoever to Iran. However, Hayat, Tahrir al-Sham, they're in the top 10 since 2017, okay? And that we're dealing with a top 10 terrorist group pretending that Iran is this massive threat, and that, if Iran just stops supporting Hamas will go away. No, it won't. This, with the Palestinian people that are represented now by Hamas and are becoming more popular, not less, among the Palestinian people.
Yeah.
They're fighting for something. They're fighting for the land. They're fighting for the right to live. That's what the West doesn't get. We don't view them as human beings. We don't view them as people worthy of even life. And so that's why I say this. The dynamic in this, if Trump foolishly falls for what Keen's purporting to push, I think they're in for a real surprise. That Iran is much more militarily capable, and we're much less militarily capable than we imagine.
Yeah, and I think just on the surface of it, as has been demonstrated, if Iran were to unleash its full missile capacity, it would saturate, whatever from the Iron Dome and David Sling and all that in very short order, because I don't think they don't have as many interceptor missiles, I think, as Iran probably does missiles just by itself. But then, of course, they have control of the Strait of Hormuz. They could do all that if they needed to. But the bigger question that I have for you, in light of this whole BRICS situation here, if the United States and or Israel, and either or both together, were to try to make good on that and to try to decapitate the Iranian regime, what would happen? What do you think would be the reaction of China and Russia?
I think we would see a nuclear war. Russia will defend Iran. Russia now recognizes, this is one of the lessons that comes out of Syria, efforts to negotiate, efforts to have agreements that the West will honor. What they've learned is the West does not honor these agreements. We make these agreements and we either walk away from them, like with the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, we walk away from that, or the Minsk Agreement, we lie about that and betray it. And then the
Astana, JCPOA, you could add that into it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, the West fails to appreciate that, particularly the Russians. They're pretty legalistic. They make these agreements and they actually expect everybody to abide by them.
So one of the first things that I've been arguing this since 2019, even before that we need to get our troops out of Syria, because they do nothing but serve as a point of strategic vulnerability, both Iraq and in Syria. But it seems like the outgoing White House is wanting to say, hey, forget about that. Don't let any of these troops go here because they are desperately needed for our national security.
We have a presence both in Iraq and in Syria. That presence in Syria is there to work hand in hand with local partners to continue to suppress the threat that ISIS has posed going back many years now. And we've had significant progress in that fight just even in the last few months. Major players taken off the battlefield, large-scale degradation of those ISIS forces. But of course, an event like this happens, and ISIS immediately looks to take advantage. And we have seen reports of ISIS trying out in the Syrian Badia, the desert, to try to reconstitute to a certain extent. So we will continue to take action against that. And we will continue to make sure that force protection, the protection of our service members who are serving at a range of bases in eastern Syria, is the paramount concern from the president on down.
And then yesterday, Sabrina Singh from the Pentagon actually adds to that and says that she said CENTCOM, together with allies and partners in this region, will continue to carry out operations to degrade ISIS capabilities even during this dynamic period in Syria, she says. Now, I want to point that out. Now, the reason why I asked Gary to highlight that part is the word degrade, because what that means is, it has been in practice, it's an ill-defined term. It can mean anything you want, and it's also militarily unattainable. No one can ever say when they have been degraded or what criteria meets that definition so that you can say mission accomplished and leave. It means we will stay there forever. How do you see this playing out in the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, let's recognize Jelani, the head of HTS. He's an ISIS subsidiary. The next 40 days are going to be pretty chaotic from the U.S. policy standpoint, because the State Department is really in no position to make an established policy of how we're going to deal with Jelani. Because either you've got to go through the process of removing him from the terrorist list and taking down the $10 million rewards that's on his head,
Right.
which, that's going to require some decision making out of diplomatic security. That's where that program's managed. I don't see at this juncture that anybody at state, the tendency of these foreign service officers, nobody wants to really make a decision, because if you make a decision, might get blamed. And if you get blamed, boy, there goes your future career of possibly getting named ambassador somewhere. So the old saying, an action passed is an action taken. So they're going to be playing hot potato with this thing. Well, yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't you put it over here and see what they want to do? So that whole coordination process will go on until the Trump people show up. And then they're going to have that sandwich of bovine excrement to eat.
So now Trump tried to get our troops out of Syria before he left office, and was talked out of it by the foreign policy elite and the military elite.
Esper and Milley,
among others. But now he's coming in this time, and those kind of people aren't there. Do you think that he'll make good on that? Because immediately he'll be attacked as, oh my gosh, you are surrendering to Iran, something like that. What do you think he'll do? Yeah, no, I don't think he'll end up pulling them out. I think they'll stay there. They'll find some excuse, because what you're going to see is, I think the Turks are going to attack the Kurds. Some of that's already happening. So the war between Turkey and or Turkey, as they like to say, and the Kurds, that's going to intensify. And so the United States then sides with the Kurds, sort of, and we're going to be witnessing a massacre of the Kurds by the Turks. Because you've got the Kurdish, the PKK, which has been carrying out terrorist attacks against Turkey for, 40 years. Yeah. I was actually hired along with Ambassador Morris Busby back in 1995 to write an analysis of the PKK and its support by the government of Greece in carrying out terrorist attacks against the Turks. And there was ample evidence. So this has been a long-standing problem, but Turkey, that's what Turkey wants. They would like to see a Syria in which all elements of Syria were under rule of one entity, and including the Kurds, so that the Kurds don't get their own independent country. The Kurds, however, are going to be pressing this moment for independence, and Jelani and ISIS and all those guys, they don't have the military reach right now to go out and impose any kind of order or force. The Kurds have an advantage. And so, like I said, this is going to be chaos. And so Trump's going to inherit this chaos. One way to help mitigate that would be to pull U.S. forces out and say, hey, this isn't our problem, just let them fight it out. But with Hegseth, if he makes it through, with Marco Rubio, with Waltz, those people are all inclined to, oh, no, we got to stay in there, because they'll see this in terms of we've got to help protect Israel. That's the lens that all of this is going to be looked at.